ManiFiesta. Let's get started with Cuba. The Cuban Revolution liberated the country in the late 50s. In your book, you highlight a multitude of examples on how the United States have been trying for 70 years to ruin the socialist ambitions of the Cuban people. Why is such a small country, it has the same number of inhabitants as Belgium, for instance. Why is such a small country so an enormous threat to the United States?
Yeah, so the first thing I think to really appreciate is the language that the US government uses in their own documents to talk about why they're upset with Cuba. Like, there's no need to create language for them. They have language. And one of the great things about working on any project with Noam Chomsky has been his prodigious reading of US government documents and his incredible memory. Because, I mean, I wouldn't have known where to go to find the exact things. He basically, I was like his research assistant. We talked for hours and then he said, here, 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 here. And I would go and find it. And what we put together is, in a sense, a clear picture of the US government attitude from 1960, let's say, 59-60, all the way out to the present. US government documents talk about the Cuban Revolution as an act of disobedience.
Yeah.
That Cuba is disobeying the United States. And that this disobedience must be controlled. And this is the second word. There are really two words here. This disobedience must be controlled because the US government fears disobedience can become contagious.
Yeah.
So disobedience and contagion. It's not entirely only the communism. It's not entirely only the communism. They feared more than that. In fact, much more than the communism. They feared that the hemisphere of the Americas, and they had good reason to fear this, would take the example of Cuba and say that we don't want Washington to formulate our domestic policies. We'd like to formulate them ourselves. Which means we want to formulate it our own way, not necessarily communist. Could be even social democratic. Not permitted. So it was disobedience and then the fear that disobedience would be contagious. That's what we latched upon.
A variation of the domino theory they use in Southeast Asia.
Very much so. The contagion is very much a variation, except with one difference. There was really no domino theory. I mean, Vietnam had its revolution in 1945. Ho Chi Minh was at work independently of Mao Zedong. There was really no domino. In South America and Latin America in general, there was a contagion. I mean, the Cuban Revolution became an emblem of the possibilities for South America and Latin America. Many people followed the example of Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, tried to start armed struggle, whether it's Douglas Bravo and company in Venezuela, Hector Behar and others in Peru and so on, Carlos Marighella in Brazil. In fact, there was contagion. Like, they were not wrong. I celebrate the contagion. They worry about it. I celebrate the disobedience. They worry about it. I mean, I don't disagree with their theory of disobedience come contagion. I agree with it. It was an act of disobedience. There was contagion. They think it's bad. We think it's good.
Why should people read the history of Cuba today?
Very important. Cuba is under immense pressure, as the United States government quite correctly went after Venezuela in order to defang Cuba. It was a correct strategy. They understood that Cuba was in really dire straits in the 1990s, the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's a small island, doesn't have access to energy, has to import it. So the embargo was having enormous impact in the 1990s when the Soviet Union collapsed. The victory of the government of Hugo Chavez came to power in 1998, 99. When Chavez comes in, he opens a new relationship between Venezuela and Cuba, and in a way gave Cuba a lifeline to energy. the United States, I think, has understood if they can bring down the Bolivarian revolution in Venezuela, it would isolate Cuba. And they're very much trying to do that. So Cuba is in a tough situation now, back on the state sponsor of terrorism list by the US under heavy pressure. Very interesting. In my opinion, this is a difficult period, not only because of that, but, Jan, the entire generation of people that have been inspired to join the Cuba Solidarity Movement globally are now getting older and older and dying. And a new generation doesn't really understand the essence of why the Cuban Revolution is so important to all of us.
Yeah.
It's important to you in Belgium. It was very important to me in India. It's important to all of us. So, I mean, when Chomsky and I talked about it, I said to him, look, we have both very rich experiences in Cuba and so on. Let's put this book together. And I said, partly it's because the Cuba Solidarity Movement needs a master class. Noam Chomsky is a good person. And initially, he said, okay, you can interview me. I did it. And then it didn't come out well because he said, you know things that I don't know. That is, Chomsky hasn't been to Cuba as much as I've been, and certainly not in recent years. So he said, why don't we write it together so that you can fill in sections about the contemporary period and so on. We understood that the aim of a very little book like that was to basically put for a young generation put the importance of the Cuban Revolution front and center and why the United States tried to suffocate it at the heart of the book.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to another subject now, the extreme right. I would like to ask a first question about actual problems coming up in Germany. We had recently the election in Thüringen and Saxon, where the AfD, a new fascist party, has become, in one of those states, the greatest, and the second with percentages around 30%. So the extreme right is becoming a real danger in Europe. Just before asking about your analysis, what is your comment on this situation?
Well, I mean, this rise of the Alliance for Deutschland, AfD in Germany and other right-wing forces in Europe, particularly Le Pen's reconstructed version of her father's party in France and so on.
Yeah.
All of these are, in fact, a product of Europe's continued subordination to the United States. I mean, if Europe was actually able to create an independent understanding of itself, an independent foreign policy, independent domestic policy. I mean, what's wrong with importing natural gas from Russia? What's wrong with joining the Chinese Belt and Road system? What's wrong with having security agreements with the Russians saying that, okay, we won't have nuclear weapons, east of the Oder, or we won't even have nuclear weapons placed outside France and maybe UK, which are already nuclear powers. What's wrong with having that? Have an independent foreign policy, build a relationship with them. No, instead, you have been suffocated by NATO, suffocated by the European Union, which basically is largely an appendage of the United States, and driven the people into austerity. It's that has pushed the AfD. The AfD is not the return of Adolf Hitler. The AfD and Le Pen are the product of Europe's continued subordination to the United States and to US wars and policies and austerity programs and so on. That produced the AfD. It's convenient even for European liberals to put their hands in there and scream, the fascists are at the gate, the fascists are at the gate. You made them. They are your creature. This is not Hitler. This is not Mussolini. They are not coming in now as actual fascist hordes to smash the workers' movement. There is no workers' movement. Workers' movement doesn't exist in Germany. There are some old trade unions that are upset with factory closures. Factories are closing because you're not developing more collaboration with Chinese green technology. That's your own problem. Yeah. There's no real workers' movement in France that is a threat to the bourgeoisie because there's no real productive activity happening in France. It's a lot of it is moving the surplus around. So this is not fascism of a classical type. I can understand again why liberals want to yell and scream fascist, because they want to say, come home to us, even though we have no policy. But that's not the same as a scientific assessment of the AFD as a fascist party.
Yeah.
There may be some fascist currents that are entering these parties of the far right. There are some actual Nazis and so on, white supremacists and so on. But is the whole current fascist? I think that's actually wrong because you're missing that the mass base of a lot of these parties, the 30% that votes here, 25% there, are actually not voting for the skinheads. They're not voting for the Nazis. They are voting against the consensus.
Let's have a deeper look at some of your 10 theses on this special type of the extreme right. And the first I'd like to tackle is the far right is a special type of a special type, uses democratic instruments as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, the far right of a special type around the world has understood very well the long march through the institutions. They entered education institutions, they entered the media, communications world, they entered into local politics, and then they just came everywhere. It's not that they want to do a coup d'etat. They just started taking over the whole culture. They understood it very well. They've been doing this for decades. It's a kind of long-term cultural war that they have provoked. And they keep provoking debates against liberals where they show liberals to be hypocritical and then say that they are the only truth tellers and so on. So for them, democracy has not been an impediment. They've used democratic institutions to secure power. And why should they suspend these institutions? They are all good for them. For instance, the last 25, 30 years, liberals have strengthened the repressive apparatus inside liberal democratic societies in Europe. Liberals have in fact passed anti-terrorism laws, laws against this, saying that, whatever. They set the infrastructure for the far right. When the far right comes to power, they're going to use the same infrastructure. Terrorism laws, you said the wrong thing, we'll pick you up. This is not fascism of the right. This is, in a sense, the fascism of the center, if you want to use the word fascism polemically, which I don't like to do. So this is a repressive apparatus which the centrist forces created. Now the far right is given them as a gift. And this has all happened through the constitutional process. And I think this has to be recognized. They are not a threat to democracy.
No.
Democracy welcomes them.
Yeah. Another type you find in the far right of a special type, you say it incites homeopathic doses of violence in society to create fear, but not just enough fear to turn people against it. I find that very well formulated, I must say.
No, because think about it. If we look around, let's say, European civilization at this time, the dominant class in society is the middle class. Now, elites may control the economy and media, but the dominant social class is the middle class. Middle class defines culture in European society. And the middle class world over understands a few particular things. One is they don't want to fall into poverty. They're very scared of the snake in Snakes and Ladders. They would like to climb to the top, but they know it's not going to happen. They're pretty content with the middle class life. So what they actually don't want is inconvenience. They are absolutely upset if there are traffic jams, if the planes are cancelled when they want to go for holiday. They're upset when the power goes out, if it ever goes out. There's some problem with the water supply. Can't get your child into a school. Inconvenience is the principal thing that bothers the middle class. The far right of a special type knows that you must not inconvenience the middle class. Having a general strike, which is what the left does, creates inconvenience for the middle class. They don't like that. They get upset with the left. Far right doesn't do that. What the far right of a special type does is they'll find one leader of a trade union or one person from the left. They either beat them up privately or they kill them or they make a spectacle somewhere. They go and demonstrate in a small place. They scare the left. They scare the unions. They scare those organizations. But they don't need to create too much violence. Just a little bit of violence. Maybe a little riot here or a little riot there. Sometimes they overreach. In England recently, they had too many riots and it created inconvenience and the state had to crack down on them. So generally when they are clever, they just go and assassinate a trade union leader. car catches fire or something and he's gone. That's all they need to do. And then they win society. Because the middle class says, see, unlike the left, at least these fellows don't bring tractors into the middle of town and create chaos. Occasionally there's some riot, immigrant is killed. We're very sorry about that. And they are also sorry. They said it was extreme elements of their movement. They have forced it. But that homeopathic violence, the killing of that migrant, sends a message to everybody, all migrants. We're going to come for you. Okay, be scared of us.
Yeah.
You don't need to go and kill 100 migrants. That's a massacre. Just one person is enough. That's the homeopathic use of violence.
Yeah, okay. I think we have time for one more question. Okay. And I would like to come to the working class more. The far right of a special type undermines social life by creating alienation via precarious working conditions and flexible working hours. Your comment on that?
Yeah, so one of the things that capitalism has done in our period is it has created general precariousness. And what the far right is able to do, and that precariousness, by the way, actually generates and deepens enormous loneliness among people. You don't have a trade union, you're working odd hours, very hard to maintain friendships. Can't go to the bar or the pub at the same time as other people. You always see strangers because your timings are not controlled by you. It's very interesting what capitalism has done to social life by making working life precarious. It's made people feel a sense of deep insecurity and loneliness.
Yeah.
We on the left don't think about the loneliness much. There's a danger in left political parties, and Die Linke had this problem in Germany. They began to worry about issues from a almost middle class perspective. They began to worry about issues of self-identity, for instance, which are very important issues, which must be taken seriously, but they should not forget the class issues that are dominant in creating loneliness. Yeah. The real identity battle today is the battle against loneliness and against a sense of insecurity. And for that, the far right creates a community with symbols and a unification of some people against others. They are very clever at bringing people together against somebody else, against liberals or against immigrants or against somebody. They create communities of people, even if these communities aren't really communities. They're often online communities. But there's a kind of fabrication of a community against loneliness. We on the left are not doing that. We are not finding good ways to bring people together to confront and build against loneliness. I mean, when I see something like ManiFiesta, people come, they are so happy to be here. But in a way, I hope that in our left world, ManiFiesta is not an annual event. It happens every weekend in every working class part of Belgium. Every weekend in a place, there should be a place like this where children can play, where there can be left culture, working class culture. We bring people together across their various backgrounds, different languages and so on. Let them interact, eat a vegan burger, a different burger, whatever, read a book out aloud. This should be a part of the culture of society that the left injects. I think this is important. Otherwise, we'll only have a sort of left liberalism, which I fear in terms of the culture of a society, because the middle class dominates culture. We have to insert the working class into the making of social culture. And we are not there. We're not doing it enough around the world, which is what opens the door for the special far right of a special type to come in and claim that they have a solution for loneliness. They don't, but we do.
Thank you.
ManiFiesta!